Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to go out of my way to talk about a movie called Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Reasonably, I have probably seen the weirdest freaking movies you've ever seen in your life. Titles that don't make sense to the movie, or reasonably just titles and movies that just don't make sense. When going into this film, I think I came out of it just going, you know what, there's something visually interesting about this movie. And overall, the concept of it is kind of fascinating to me. And when after watching this movie, I was just kind of like, okay, like I can understand like the reason why someone would do this movie, even though portions of it was kind of a goofy thing to approach and or do. But whatever. It ended up being kind of an interesting film at the end of the day. So, anyways, because again, I've seen some odd like films. I've seen movies like Earth Girls or Easy. I've seen movies like uh, scratching my head right now trying to figure it out. Non literally, figuratively. I've seen Starving Game. That was a stupid thing to watch, but I watched it anyways. A lot of those parody like films that are most of the time they're pretty much garbage. They kind of get way too far off into tangents and way too far off into obscure things that don't quite make sense all connected together, but they are what they are. So, what is this movie about? So, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, ultimately we have it to where seemingly we have a spaceship that is ultimately made out of a circus tent that reasonably ends up landing onto space for some reason. We just don't quite understand why. But justifiably, we have it to where it seems that these clowns are seemingly zapping people with some kind of ray or some kind of weird device of sorts and turning everybody into cotton candy to seemingly have all the blood sucked out of them through a weird and wild crazy straw. If that's not weird enough, there are also people being put into balloons. There is also a balloon animal that ends up being a dog that ultimately has the clowns chasing after these people. Like, so this balloon dog is reasonably going to be able to track down these two people that are running away from this clown ship. And I'm just like, so what? That is really interesting to just kind of play around with the. We have popcorn that bizarrely turns into some monsters of sorts. I think the weirdest scene going on in this entire movie is the bathroom scene where the girl eventually gets out of the shower to seemingly be attacked by things that were in her laundry hamper and her toilet. That was the weirdest thing that I saw in this film, and that's not even everything that I'm going to ultimately say right now, because Q seemingly 100-foot clown at the end of the film, but good God, just everything was like there was a lot of weird things going on in this film, and there was a lot of points in time where I was thinking, okay, this movie has to go this way, and surefire enough, it exactly went that way. And I was like, okay, like I don't mind that this movie fell exactly to the way of which that I thought it was going to be. reasonably, I kind of thought that what was going to end up happening is that more and more people were going to end up being clowns, because I remember, if you guys ever heard of a show, probably not, called Extreme Ghostbusters, there was one episode called Killjoys, where ultimately all of a sudden, eventually at one point, one of the Ghostbusters became a clown at some point. So I naturally assumed that's going to be the progression of this movie, to where eventually someone's going to eventually be turned into a clown in this movie, but I guess they didn't go that route. So it's like, oh, okay, all right, well, I guess you just have enough clowns. That's perfectly fine. Anyways, we have within this movie a stubbornly skeptic-ish like person, which ultimately is Curtis Mooney, the sheriff. That ultimately is the much more stickler, much more like the guy that plays John Vernon, who plays Curtis Mooney. I also remember him from, like, he usually plays the uh he usually plays the very strict role. I remember also him being in Savage Streets as the principal of the school that Linda Blair went into. Yeah, Linda Blair. She was in Savage Streets. And ultimately, people probably don't remember that film because they probably never heard of it in their life. I'm not recommending that movie, but ultimately, there is quite a bit of uh, topless women in that movie, so go ahead and check that out if you never have. Ultimately, check out the soundtrack before you even check out the movie, because that's what I really recommend, because that soundtrack is freaking awesome. So, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Long enough title for you? No. So going into this, I was like, okay, so is this gonna be one of those where it's gonna be a gross out movie and I'm gonna hate it, or like it kind of makes it to be like a simple movie? It's a simple film. We just kind of have the clowns kind of going from door to door to door to door, and basically zapping everybody up in their ray guns of sorts, or their clown guns of sorts. Some of the doorbell rings from door to door to door. Some of them are kind of creative. Some of them are kind of interesting, and some were kind of funny. Recently, I thought that, like, I thought overall that this movie was just kind of good enough. Like, it didn't need to go full on fledglingly, like, near to, like, oh, we need to really just repetitiously go far too out there. No. Like, I think the approach of this movie is simple but effective, to be brutally honest. Effective in the fact that it's like, hey man, just like the amount of costume being put together alone for this film, like, that is the most impressive thing about this movie, is how, like, you have to get a number of guys all in these costumes, and they all have to do this whatever, working with their costume, which I'm sure was heavily elaborate and this and that and whatever have you. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this movie. I thought that it was, like, it gave me those old fashioned movie vibes where, like, you don't have it to where these things have to, like, if anything, this movie has to make people just uncomfortable or unsettled, and that's all that you need to do within this movie. Like, I think the It movie, the very first It remake movie, was really, through that movie, really unsettling. At some point, it could probably scare a bunch of people, but I just thought that the first It movie was really unsettling, and then the remake was much more scarier than the first. It Chapter 2 was much more scarier than the original It remake. It just was. So going into this movie, I thought that this movie was unsettling, and so recently it was just kind of like, because there was visual stuff where it kept escalating and escalating to where it got a little goofy, and I'm like okay, all right. So let's go into reviewing Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Let's dust out the double five to otherwise count down to otherwise say, I had fun watching this film. I love watching old movies that ultimately people have to second guess why I watched this film. Because I haven't seen it. Because I never saw it in my life. I've never, like, this is not one of those where I stayed, I stayed up late at night one night and I saw bits and pieces of this movie and now I wanted to fully fledgedly watch this movie all over again. If ultimately you want to see this movie for the first time, you can finally say that you saw it currently into the seconds recording on YouTube for free with ads. That's ultimately where I'd seen this movie. I don't know if this is the actual 100% unedited version of this movie. So if there is a unrated version of this that ultimately didn't make it onto YouTube because ultimately there might be some stuff that it pulled away from doing. I don't know. It seems like all the other movies, it didn't really seem to pull away from things, but who knows? So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I get to spoil this movie. So, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. So, in the very beginning of this movie, we never actually have one real legitimate, we don't have any real scenes of showcasing really much of anything. As far as, there is one girl in the shower, but recently we don't really see anything with that because, of course, they kind of edit it to not really show of anything. As well as kind of throughout this movie, there might be illusions of certain things going on, but nothing's really going on. So, because ultimately in the very beginning of this movie, we have it to where there's a bunch of people, I guess, what would be questionably at this makeout point, I guess, to where we have a bunch of people all getting rowdy in their car. Rowdy meaning they are getting romantic in their cars. We ultimately have two kids in a ice cream car or truck of sorts, ultimately making their way, funnily enough, using ice cream and sensual innuendos to kind of making fun of all these people at this quasi makeout point. So we reasonably have our main character mostly focused, Mike Tobacco. That's seriously his name. I'm like, his last name was Tobacco? Wow, that's funny. And we also have Debbie Stone. Man, did they really pick really interesting names for these characters. So, Mike Tobacco and Debbie Stone ultimately are at this quasi makeup point, and we ultimately have Mike mention that he's like, hey, yeah, those are my two best friends. Ultimately, the two guys that are ultimately trying to sell ice cream to all these people. We ultimately have the two ice cream guys that are ultimately with their two gals that they had to seduce them with ice cream by offering them unlimited ice cream if they go with them to that place, hoping that they were going to get lucky at the end of all this, but probably not going to happen. So they end up driving away, just going, "Oh, we didn't really sell any ice cream, I guess. So let's just keep on moving." It seems that eventually we have it to where there is some kind of comet or some kind of shooting star of sorts that ends up falling upon this town. And so reasonably we have it to where Mike and Debbie end up making their way to see what that exactly was. We also have some seemingly hillbilly farmer called Gene Green also making his way down first before everybody to go and check out what this thing could have brought him, because he's like, yeah, maybe I'll get a ton of money out of whatever this is. Then end up crashing its way to be nearby my farm. We ultimately have, sadly enough, Gene Green ultimately has a dog with him that ultimately has a bandana, and we end up having the clowns ending up stealing his dog. So we're like, hey, you took my dog, I'm gonna get you, I'm gonna try to get my dog back. So this farmer-ish like guy, he ends up justifiably, like, this entire spaceship looks like a circus tent, and he's like, yeah, the circus is in town, like, where's the front door, where's the ticket booth, I wanna be in this circus, I wanna be all up in this circus, this would be great if I could just go all up in this circus, but where's the ticket booth, I can't find it. So eventually they take his dog, and so ultimately he grabs onto this seemingly wire of sorts, or seemingly like rope of sorts. So he grabs on it and he gets electrocuted the crap out of himself to where he dies. So it seems that we ultimately have Mike, again, Tobacco, ultimately and Debbie with him to seemingly make their way onto this circus-ish like place. And so reasonably, they end up finding seemingly a doorway to go into this circus tent. And so reasonably what ends up happening is they end up having Mike kind of bejokingly making up some mockery-ish like circus thing. And I thought that was kind of hilarious. The things that he was kind of making up, maybe on the fly, or maybe it was scripted, who knows. But I thought it was fascinating stuff that he was bringing up to ultimately make it seem like there are plenty of enough things in this circus-like thing, with the exception of there just being really clowns there, but not actually where they actually are. So we have it to where Debbie and Mike are just kind of going through and hitting buttons on the doors of these supposed elevators, to where they're trying to figure out, like, hey, what's up with this? Are we gonna find anybody? Are we gonna find anything? And so recently they end up going through certain levels of this circus tent, and bizarrely they're seeing weird stuff that doesn't quite seem like a circus normal tent. And then eventually they get into this cotton candy room, where it seems that there have been people collected already to be turned into cotton candy like things, because reasonably they end up pulling away from the cotton candy, maybe to eat a little bit of it, and they find a face in the cotton candy, and they're like, oh my god, whoever is taking any number of these people are turning them into cotton candies. That's weird. So we end up eventually having the clowns ultimately seemingly finding out that there are people within their ship, and so what they end up doing is they end up shooting them with a gun of popcorn. And I'm like, say what? And also Mike and Debbie are also confused why they were shot with popcorn. Doesn't quite make any sense, but later on it'll be justified why they were shot with popcorn. Even though Mike no longer consistently had the popcorn within him at some point, but I guess it's just a moot point. It kind of barely quasi helps the story at some point, but anyways, moving on. So we have it to where we have the people running away from these clowns, and ultimately we have the clowns, seemingly, since the popcorn gun didn't work, you ultimately have it to where the other clown is going to track down the the Mike and Debbie via having a balloon animal dog that ultimately they can track down these people. And I thought that was like, I was like, what is he gonna do with the balloon? Like, what is he gonna make with the balloon? And then I realized it was a dog. I'm like, oh my god, this is brilliant. And so the dog is like tracking him down. Well, the balloon dog is tracking them down, and I thought that was hilarious. And so reasonably, it ends up that the Mike and Debbie eventually get into their car and hightail it to where I think they smack. I think they smash the clowns, and then I think they burst the dog balloon, and so reasonably they hightail it back to town to ultimately tell anybody that will rationally think that they're rational enough to say any of these things will believe them. All while every single clown is making their way to town because they're like, well, hey, like we gotta find these people and we gotta come after them, and plus we might as well just start like just getting a bunch of people anyways because I think we've got everybody that we've gotten through here, and we eventually find out that all the clowns have collected all the people from this makeout point because ultimately we head back there. So pushing on, we ultimately have it to where Mike and Debbie are making their way to the police station. We seem to have Curtis Mooney, who is the very stricter of these two police officers. We also have Dave Hansen, that seems to be the guy from police school and the police academy. And I don't know why Mooney is just such a dick, but he is. Towards me, he had roughed up some hooligans that were drinking beers or something off campus, and so recently he had to arrest them for that. So we have it to where Debbie and Mike make their way to this this police station to tell them what they saw. And of course, Mooney is just like, dude, this is probably some prank. If anything, like, this makes no sense. You guys are just like spouting off all this randomness and whatever, what have you. Which, here's what I like about this guy that otherwise, like, is never going to believe any story that anyone is going to tell him. Mooney is. We have it to where every single other person in town is crazily calling Mooney to tell them about the clowns attacking them, and Mooney does not believe it. Even to right within his face later on in this movie, we eventually have a clown show up in the police station, which I'm like, yeah, like immediately when I saw the police station, immediately I'm like, a clown has to show up at this police station. It has to happen. And justifiably, when it does later on in the movie, I'm like, yeah, I knew that was going to happen from scene one, and good. They did this scene that actually makes sense for the clown to be in this police station because surefire enough, there isn't enough environments that have been built through this movie that ultimately can justify the environment of the police station being used to eventually have a clown within it. Good. But let's not concentrate on that now. So we ultimately have Dave Hansen, who is just going to uh, drive these two pranksters home. We ultimately have it to where evidently Dave had some romantic entanglement with Debbie, and so I guess there is a quasi love triangle kind of going throughout this film, but nothing is really cemented, really, to just ultimately say that Debbie's gonna end up with anybody. I guess. So, going on into this film, we have seemingly where Debbie goes home to take a shower, and seemingly we eventually find out that this popcorn is moving within her bathroom, and then eventually is going to be kind of moving around in her bathroom, I guess, to B1 in her toilet, and then B2 in her laundry hamper thing. And then ultimately that is going to be birthing some monsters that I will be talking at some point later. So reasonably we have Debbie going into the shower and really can't see anything, to the point where even when she's in the shower, we're just kind of seeing the curtains and whatever's happening outside of her shower while that's going on. So while Debbie is taking a very long time in the shower because it seems that Mike and Dave are doing a bunch of other stuff while Debbie is repetitiously in the shower for who knows how long. So Mike and Dave we're having Mike and Dave, we're having them, Mike is telling Dave everything that he saw, and that, hey, like, we need to go down to where the ship was, and like, I'll show everything to you. If anything, I'll give any evidence and whatever of this thing happening. So we have it to where Mike and Dave make their way to the place where this ship had landed. And weirdly enough, the ship is completely gone, but there is a big hole in the ground. So Dave is a little kind of questioning things. He's a little confused. Like, he doesn't quite understand why Mike is going so out of his way to make this story up. But we ultimately have to where Dave is ultimately kind of doing some detective work, and he is noticing an entire car full of cotton candy, and seemingly someone is missing their glasses. So we have Dave who's like, you know what? Like, I'm going to believe Mike, and I'm going to uncuff him, and I'm just gonna, like, I'm gonna tell him, okay, like, I think that there's something, that I could buy with your story. So, like, we're gonna try to see what we can do with this. So we have the clowns going door to door to otherwise ultimately deliver pizza to people at one point. Where ultimately it's not actually pizza, it's actually just all the clowns who are eventually going to zap and otherwise trap people. At one point, we have a clown delivering a heart-shaped candy box, which ultimately was just to zap a person. At some point, we have a hand puppet play going on, where ultimately some guy is watching and laughing at this. To where eventually we find that a clown is behind this puppetry, and eventually we have to where this puppet master ends up zapping a person, and this and that. We have eventually more and more as this is all going on, we're getting phone calls that Mooney is getting from everybody. It seems that there is a clown that is hiding as a statue in front of this pharmacy, or in front of this store. Two women end up going in, and two women don't ever leave because ultimately they are turned into cotton candy. And then two clowns are evidently going into this store and wreck the place. Basically, to where this pharmacy doctor-ish like person is like, "Hey, can I help you? Can I?" To the point to where he is calling Mooney. He's like, "I'm having a little problem here." So Mooney is basically saying, "Man, this entire town is in on this prank, And man, like, I don't get why everybody's being in on this prank because, like, are they paying people or what are they doing? Like, this prank makes no sense. And why does everybody have the same story? And why is everybody going along with this prank, this entire town? To where reasonably Mooney is just like, you know what, I think they just want to, like, I just think that they want to frustrate me so badly to force me to quit. And I'm not going to. You can't get me, you effers. Like, no. And so, like, that's the hilarious thing about this movie is you have the sheriff that's not believing a lick of anybody, and I just find it funny. But anyways, pushing on, we have to where Dave and Mike are they are trying to figure out where exactly where exactly to find these clowns because it seems like they're everywhere. Even at some point, there is some motorcycle gang where a clown shows up with his bike, and so one of the motorcycle gang members, like, "Hey, can I ride your bike? Can I honk the horn? Can I look at it and just be amazed about why you're here and what the heck that you're doing?" And so reasonably, we have the motorcycle gang member ending up breaking the clown's bike. And so reasonably, we have it to where the clown ends up putting on boxing gloves and punching the head off of this gang member, to where after that happens, everybody crazily scrambles after that, quickly trying to drive away with their motorcycles. And I just thought that was like, oh my god, this is hilarious. That, like, this clown literally knocked this guy's block off or knocked his head off with boxing gloves. That was really interesting. So pushing on, it kind of just gets to the point to where they easily and quickly start collecting all of these people through cotton candy, like cocoons of sorts, and to the point to where almost like they're bringing out like clown vehicles and such, and like it's almost getting to where they're having like a clown parade where they're collecting people and then like sucking them into this machine and so on and so forth. We eventually have it to where Mike and Dave eventually go out of their way to one call Mooney, which when he gets the phone call from Dave, Mooney's just like, God, you're in on this prank too? Like, and Dave's like, no, I'm serious about all this. You gotta call the states. You gotta call, like, the state police and have them help us. And Mooney's like, no, like, come on. Like, stop this. Like, even you're in on this? Like, man, like, this is ridiculous. So, we have it to where Dave is seemingly on his own, and it seems at some point they have to try to figure out how to take down these clowns. And the weirdest thing happens. We have it to where eventually, one, before I tell them how, I'll tell you how they defeat these clowns. We ultimately have it to where Debbie gets out of her shower like 3 years later, and ultimately, I'm sure she's the pruniest prune that ever pruned in her life. She walks out of the shower and is attacked by her laundry hamper that now has little clown heads with some kind of wormish like thing coming out of them. It looks like, I think that is the most like unsavory part about this entire film. The bathroom scene is just like the wildest thing. You ultimately have also like this clown head coming from out of this toilet, and I'm like, yeah, that's I don't like that either. That's gross. I don't like that. Don't, yeah, that's no. Duh, no. if anything, like everything was okay up until that effing part. Whereas, like, dude, like that's kind of messed up. But justifiably, like, yeah, it's to like everything about this movie is to make somebody uncomfortable, and so yeah, like messing with somebody's toilet, I guess, could be the most uncomfortable thing to do. But anyway, so we have it to where Debbie is getting attacked from all sides in her bathroom. Ultimately, she is taking her shower head and I guess drowning her toilet clown thing. And then ultimately, she has to put the shower curtains over the laundry hamper ish like thing, and then kind of make her way out of the bathroom. It's the weirdest scene to try to defeat these things. Um, and so reasonably we have to where Debbie is making her way out of her apartment or out of her home, and she ends up getting into the front door to have a clown meeting her at her front door. To where I'm like, okay, this is weird. And so we have to where Debbie slams the door, of course, and ultimately is going to jump out a window where the window has the fire brigade of clowns that are ultimately like, hey, yeah, jump on here, this trampoline thing. Yeah, just come on down because we're going to get you. So, recently now, Debbie has nowhere to run. And ultimately, when she goes back into her home, the clowns have made their way through her front door and are just going, hey, yeah, we're here. How's it going? So we have it to where instead of the clowns making Debbie a cotton candy cocoon, instead they put her in a balloon bizarrely. Okay. So we have it to where, and the weirdest thing is, we have it to where these clowns now have a car, and so we end up finding out that it seems that the clowns had put their circus tent ish like ship around close to a amusement park. And so reasonably within this film, eventually at some point, Dave and Mike are trying to take down these clowns. And Dave evidently figures out that if you shoot the clowns in the red nose, that kills them, or what I would assess is death to them. I'm like, this is the oddest thing that I've ever seen in my life, but it's really interesting as well. So we have to where they seemingly have to go back to the ship to rescue Debbie. And so we are going further into this movie to see more about this ship, because if we didn't see more about this ship earlier, we have to kind of see that like all this stuff going on, all this stuff happening, and eventually if we didn't see the clown parade before, like now we're seeing Dave and Mike ultimately uh, having to rescue Debbie. Ultimately, knowing full well that they know that she is in some balloon, and ultimately knowing full well that they need to try to figure out an escape plan to get out of this ship once they get in it. So bizarrely, I think the hardest thing going on into this movie is to do more things about this ship. Because it seems that we have to where Mike and Dave bring along their two ice cream cohorts, and we end up finding out that these two ice cream cohorts find themselves two female clowns that ultimately are evidently heavily kissing upon them. There was a very interesting scene where we had also the clowns going into the amusement park with this clown car that repetitiously kept bringing out clown after clown after clown. And we ultimately have this security guard that is ultimately saying, hey fellas, like the amusement park is closed. And so they all hit this security guard with these pies, and these pies evidently turn this security guard into acid, to where when the ice cream guys and Dave and Mike show up, because ultimately we had Mike, who went with the ice cream car, and Dave was to follow them, but Dave ended up crashing his police car into the ice cream truck, and then ultimately, so they drove away in the ice cream truck to make their way to the amusement park. And so we have it to where they're looking at this weird visual of a Sunday, but Dave has to confirm to them. It's like, well, yeah, there's something a little bit extra with this Sunday. It has a skeleton in it. Excuse me. Excuse myself. So they head into the amusement park. They head into the circus tent. They just keep on heading into what is to be this ship. So again, the two ice cream goons end up finding their way into some female clowns, which ultimately, hilariously enough, these female clowns evidently have to bizarrely start like inflating their balloons, let's just say. Their chest balloons, let's just say, weirdly, bizarrely. Thought that was weird. But anyways, pushing on more. So we have it to where Mike and Dave end up going to the cotton candy cocoon factory part of this ship, where ultimately we have even more cotton candy like cocoons than we did before in the early part of this movie. And so it seems that Mike and Dave need to remember what the balloon that Debbie was in looked like. And so we ultimately have it to where Dave ends up shooting the balloon to pop, and so evidently Debbie couldn't really breathe, and so they're trying to haul her out of there. Ultimately, it seems that there is a clown that ends up appearing, and with a crazy straw ends up sucking the blood out of this cotton candy cocoon. And we have it to where Mike is like, "Oh my god, that's what they're doing with everybody. They actually are like eating people technically, with the exception of killing a lot of the other ones." But anyways, so pushing on, we end up having a clown yet again end up finding Dave and Mike and Debbie, and so they have to kind of scramble throughout this ship, because ultimately it seems like there is no real escape plan. Even though they know how to get out, every single escape plan seems to be like having a clown be there somewhere. So they have to go further on into the ship, ultimately going through a barrage of weird or strange kind of portions of the ship to at one point they slide down this this fire pole, or this flagpole of sorts, to get further down into the, like, there's so much weird stuff going and visually hard to describe at some points. Like, even there's like a hallway filled with balloons that ultimately they have to kind of try to trudge their way through. A lot of visually weird and odd stuff going through this segment, where they're trying to just make it through this ship more. And every time to describe these ship's part, these Circus 10 ship parts are weird to describe. It's weird. So pushing on to eventually them getting into them finding some secret door that leads them to another door, which leads them to another door, where they ultimately have a very severely small door where they have to kind of uh, crouch their way through into getting through this door, and then they lock the door with the shotgun because ultimately we have Dave who runs out of shotgun bullets. So we now have this big Esh-like stage room where ultimately it has very weird and/or odd designs, and we eventually find every single clown making their way closer and closer to Dave and Mike. So Mike and Dave, or Dave ends up realizing like, hey, like, well, it seems like right behind where they were while they were holding that door open with the shotgun, it seems like they could just crawl upon that same place where the door was to to kind of crawl up to ultimately have these clowns kind of at bay for however long. So reasonably, they have absolutely no weapons at their disposal, with the exception of Dave having a gun that he doesn't seem to want to use. Sure, okay. So we have to where these clowns are ultimately just kind of like they seem to have weapons bizarrely like some of them look like hockey sticks or some of them look like wiffle ball bats that have probably been painted and so on and so forth. These weapons are really fascinating looking, and but ultimately they don't really have a real true purpose. Just to say like, hey, we have weapons now. Okay, sure. So reasonably, we have it to where these clowns are ultimately pretending to try to get at these people, but really they're completely held at bay until seemingly they vanish for some odd reason that doesn't quite make sense to me. So we have it to where Dave, Debbie, and Mike are really going, okay, why exactly did they leave? And then they look up, and it seems like there is something coming on down. Because this clown is the next contestant on You're Probably Going to Die. So we have it to where Mike, Debbie, and Dave make their way off of the place that they were uh, holding up from, and they realize there is a seemingly Godzilla-esque looking like clown that ultimately is going to, one, kill the ice cream truck because we have the two ice cream guys that kind of break their way into this room. And so ultimately, Mike and Debbie and Dave think, oh yeah, hey, like we can just escape through this ice cream truck, which ultimately cannot be started. And so it seems that the clown ends up trying to attack the ice cream truck. To ultimately, the ice cream truck ends up exploding, and so reasonably, we have it to where Dave is just saying, "Hey, like I'm gonna try and take out this 100-foot clown. How about Mike and Debbie? How about you just guys? How about you just try to make it out of here? Like I'll try to defend and try to win in the end." So seemingly we have it to where Dave is going to make the sacrifice play because I would naturally assume that this ship is probably going to explode at some point, which it does. So we have it to where Dave is seemingly shooting at this clown, kind of shooting at the head because it knows to take down the nose. So, or Dave knows to take down the nose. So we have it to where this clown seemingly isn't getting good enough or close enough for Dave to take a good shot at his head. And so reasonably we have it to where this clown, as Dave runs out of bullets, the clown grabs him, and then ultimately we have it to where, bizarrely, Dave takes his own badge and stabs the clown in the nose, and that's what kills the clown. To ultimately, we have it to where Dave is going to run, and reasonably we have the clown that explodes, and then seemingly shortly thereafter, we have the ship that ends up exploding. So, we have it to where people are like, oh my god, this is amazing because this clown ship explodes like it's fireworks, like it's 4th of July, and that doesn't make any sense. But we ultimately have the clown car then ends up falling upon the sky. And recently I was thinking, I'm like, shouldn't there be one clown left to ultimately just kind of confirm that there could be a sequel coming out of this? Like, I was assuming when everybody was kind of looking up at the sky, there's going to be at some point some clown somewhere that was going to be like, hey, I'm still here. Because ultimately, at some point, we had uh, before we wrap up the end here, I'm going to go back and talk about when Mooney eventually was killed because I thought that that scene was really interesting. But let's kind of finish up this last scene though, and then I'll get back to that. So we have to where the clown car is there, and so reasonably we have it to where Mike and Debbie go to the clown car to find Dave still alive, and ultimately to find the two stupid ice cream guys also alive as well. And I'm just like, okay, well, didn't they die? And Mike even asked a question that to where it's like, they're like, oh no, like we stayed in the freezer of the ice cream truck. So yeah, we definitely just beat out that. I'm like, sure you did. So basically that's how like Lottie da that this movie basically ends. It's just kind of like, okay, like they don't like really showcase that eventually there's going to seemingly be like have a sequel at the end of this because I assume they probably just figure like this is going to be a one-off movie because we're going to put as much money as we can to this one film and call it a day. But anyways, so here's the thing. Here's the scene that I really enjoyed. So we have eventually this clown who eventually makes it to the police station. To ultimately Mooney is looking at this clown and he's like okay, you prankster, what are you doing? So we eventually have this clown that sprays, that gives Mooney flowers that ultimately sprays him with water, and so Mooney ends up arresting the clown. And so, reasonably, what ends up happening is the clown takes off the handcuffs because we have it to where the clown can seemingly, uh, like give Mooney the gloves and the cuffs. And so recently we have it to where it seems the clown has no hands, but then he showcase still has fingers and hands and whatever. So we have it to where ultimately the clown ends up going into the jail cell, and we have it to where the clown ultimately does the little party device when ultimately you would have uh like the little thing where when you blow on it, it like unravels and like hits somebody in the face, or ends up like it's a little like blow device where it ends up like going whoo, whoo, and like back and forth. We ultimately have it to where this device, when blowing into it, at the very tail end of this little like paper-ish device, it ends up choking onto Mooney and killing him, to where ultimately we have it to where seemingly the the clown ends up breaking himself out of his own jail, to where eventually when Dave ends up going to the police station to call the state police, to ultimately desperately ask them to help, which they show up at the very last freaking minute to jack crap nothing. And so ultimately, we have Dave who makes his way to the police station to ultimately get to see a ventriloquist act between this clown and Mooney, who is now going to be puppeteered by this clown. I thought that this image was very interesting and very fun to see. Uh, Having Mooney be a puppet, I thought that was really funny. I thought it was really interesting. And so we have it to where the clown ended up like being in, like his hand was literally in Mooney, to where eventually when the clown pulls his hand out, you can see all the blood that was from this clown, which I was like, man, this is like they're really trying to go out of their way to like try to make this like visual really interesting to look at and everything like that. So Mooney ends up ridiculing Dave, but then eventually once uh, Dave realizes that Mooney is dead because Mooney falls over, we have it to where the clown gets closer and closer to Dave, and then Dave shoots him in the nose, which ultimately that's how he figures out how to kill all the clowns is to shoot them in the nose. And yeah, like a lot of this was all really interesting. The recently there was like I really enjoyed this movie for how like different it was. Yeah, at some points people would say that also this movie at some point felt probably a little cheap or a little corny or a little goofy, but I don't know how many movies probably like this probably couldn't have been able to pull off half of the stuff that they did in this movie. And reasonably, I think that this movie isn't a movie that everybody knows about, but at the end of the day, it could be eventually a movie that really at some point could probably get remade and have a bigger budget or whatever. I don't know. But looking at it full well, like, I applaud this movie for its interesting like approach and like all the stuff that ends up being put into this movie. I was like, nah, like I enjoy it. Like I enjoyed it. Like I thought it was an interesting movie. It probably feels more like a one-off film, but thought it was good enough. So I'm gonna good enoughly get out of here because I feel like I've talked enough about this movie. Um, I just really had fun with this film. So hopefully anybody had fun with either watching this review or just having me just kind of go through it. But yeah, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.